For up to 7 minutes after your heart stops, your brain is not gone. It may be more awake than at any moment of your waking life. In 2013, scientists at the University of Michigan recorded a surge of brain activity in dying animals so intense it exceeded the fully conscious state, a flare of organized electrical signaling in the seconds after the heart fell silent. Death, it turns out, is not a switch, it is a process, and the brain does something extraordinary on its way out. Here is what almost everyone believes about death. They believe it is instant. The heart stops and the lights go out, like cutting power to a house. One moment you are there, the next you are simply not. The whole system dark and empty in a single instant. Clean, immediate, final. That is the picture most of us carry, and it is the picture medicine itself used for most of its history. That picture is wrong. Death is not a moment. It is a sequence, a cascade of events that unfolds over minutes, not milliseconds. When the heart stops, the brain does not instantly shut down. It still holds a small reserve of oxygen and energy in its cells. And for a window of time, researchers often describe something on the order of several minutes before irreversible damage sets in. The brain continues to do things, strange things, organized things, things that look less like a machine dying and more like a machine doing one final furious task. Sit with that. The line between alive and dead is not a wall. It is a corridor, and the brain walks down it. This is why the very definition of death has had to change. For most of history, death meant the heart stopping. Then medicine learned to restart hearts, and people came back, sometimes from many minutes past the point once called dead. So the definition moved to the brain. And even there, the boundary keeps proving softer and stranger than anyone expected. The research is genuinely evolving, and serious scientists disagree about where the true final line lies. But the real question is not when death happens. It is what the brain is doing in that corridor, in those final minutes after the heart goes quiet. Because what the science is now finding there is unlike anything we were prepared to believe. Start with the discovery that cracked this open, because for a long time no one was even looking. For most of medical history, the dying brain was assumed to be a brain switching off, activity simply fading to flatness, like a radio losing power, the signal weakening into silence. There was no reason to expect anything else. A brain starved of blood and oxygen should, by every assumption, just wind down. Then, in 2013, a research team led by Dr. Jimo Borjigin at the University of Michigan looked carefully and found the opposite. Studying the brains of rats at the moment of cardiac arrest, they recorded what happened in the seconds after the heart stopped. They expected fading. Instead, they saw a surge. A sudden, intense burst of organized brain activity, including high-frequency gamma waves, the kind of brain waves associated in living brains with focused attention, vivid perception, and conscious awareness. Sit with how strange this is. At the moment the brain should have been going dark, it lit up. And not with random noise, but with the patterns of a mind paying close attention. And it was not a faint flicker. The activity in those seconds reached levels that exceeded what the researchers measured in the normal, fully awake state. The dying brain was, by this measure, more active than the living one. The signals were also highly coordinated, different regions of the brain communicating with each other in tight synchrony, the kind of connected, organized activity that, in a waking brain, accompanies rich, conscious experience. Let me give you the analogy that makes this land. Picture an old light bulb at the moment its filament finally fails. You might expect it to simply dim and go dark, but sometimes, just before it dies, it does the opposite. It flares, burning brighter for an instant than it ever did in normal use, blazing with everything left in it, and only then goes out. The dying brain appears to do something like this, a final, brilliant flare, everything left, released at once. Now here is why this should matter to you, personally. For years, the accounts of people who came close to death, the vivid experiences they reported from the edge, were dismissed by much of science as fantasy, as oxygen-starved confusion, as the brain malfunctioning into nonsense. But this discovery changed the conversation. If the brain produces a surge of organized, consciousness-associated activity in those final moments, then perhaps those experiences are not malfunction at all. Perhaps they are the felt experience of that surge. Perhaps the dying brain is generating something real. This work was later extended to humans. In 2022, researchers reported recordings from a dying human brain captured by chance when an elderly patient on an EEG monitor suffered cardiac arrest. And in the seconds around the heart stopping, they saw the same thing, a burst of gamma wave activity, the very pattern linked to memory retrieval and conscious recall. One of the scientists suggested the brain may, in those final seconds, be replaying significant memories, that the old idea of your life flashing before your eyes may have a real neural footprint. It is a single case, and it must be read with caution, but it pointed the same direction as the animal work. But this is only the surface. Because if the brain surges with conscious-type activity as it dies, the next question is the one that touches every living person. What does that surge actually feel like from the inside? Here is the part almost no one talks about with honesty. Across cultures, across centuries, across people who have never met and share no beliefs, the reports from the edge of death are strikingly, hauntingly similar, and that consistency is itself a kind of scientific evidence. Stay with me because the next 90 seconds reframe everything. People who are resuscitated after their hearts stop sometimes return with a memory, not of nothing, but of something. And when researchers gather these accounts, the same features appear again and again. A feeling of profound peace, the fear gone. A sense of separating from the body, sometimes of watching the scene from above. Moving through darkness toward a light. Encountering deceased loved ones. A rapid review of one's own life. And almost universally, a reluctance to come back. Read that again. Strangers, with nothing in common, describe the same corridor. Much of the serious study here comes from researchers like Dr. Sam Parnia, whose AWARE studies systematically examined the experiences of cardiac arrest survivors across multiple hospitals. What he and others found is that these experiences are not the vague, fragmented confusion you would expect from a malfunctioning brain. They are often described as clearer, more vivid, and more real than ordinary waking life. Realer than real is a phrase that comes up over and over. That is a profoundly strange thing for an oxygen-starved, dying brain to produce. Now, I want to be honest with you, because this is where caution matters. Science does not agree on what these experiences mean. Many researchers hold that they are produced entirely by the dying brain, the surge of activity, floods of certain brain chemicals, the specific way oxygen loss affects particular brain regions. The sensation of leaving the body, for instance, can be triggered by stimulating a specific spot in the brain called the temporoparietal junction. There are real physical mechanisms that can account for pieces of this. Depending on who you ask, the near-death experience is either the brain's final chemistry or a glimpse of something beyond it. The honest answer is that we do not know. If this is making sense, and you want the part that follows, what these findings actually mean for how you live the time you have, starting today, subscribe now. That section is coming in minutes, and it is the most important part of everything here. Now the empathy moment, because this is not abstract for anyone. Every person watching this has lost someone, or will one day walk this corridor themselves. The fear of death is, at its root, the fear of an instant void. The lights snapping off, nothing, gone. But if death is not an instant and not a void, if it is a process, and that process may carry a flare of peace, of memory, of something that the people who have touched it describe as the opposite of terror, then the thing we fear most may be built on a misunderstanding of what actually happens. That does not mean we know what comes after. It means the dying itself may not be what we dreaded. Even the most hard-nosed materialist reading of this science, that it is all the brain's final activity, still tells us something tender, that the brain may end not in panic, but in a surge of peace and remembered love. But none of this, not the surge, not the shared corridor, not the peace, none of it matters until you confront the deepest question of all. Because the dying brain forces us to ask what consciousness even is, and whether we have understood it at all. What almost nobody talks about is the question hiding underneath all of this. We assume, without ever examining it, that consciousness is produced by the brain, that the brain makes the mind the way a generator makes electricity, and when the generator stops, the electricity ends. But the truth is, we do not actually know this. We have never explained how it could be true. This is the deepest unsolved problem in all of science, and it has a name: the hard problem of consciousness. Here is what it means. Science can explain how your brain processes light into the signal red. It can trace every neuron, but it cannot explain why there is an experience of redness, why it feels like anything at all to be you, rather than the brain just processing in the dark, like a computer with no one home. We can map every electrical event in the brain and still not find the place where the lights of experience switch on. The leap from physical brain activity to felt experience is a gap no one has crossed. Read that again. We do not know how the brain produces consciousness. We only assume it does. And this is why the dying brain matters so much. Because if we do not truly understand how the brain generates the mind, then we cannot say with certainty what happens to the mind when the brain stops. The confident statement, consciousness simply ends at death, is not a proven fact. It is an assumption resting on another assumption we have never verified. A genuinely honest scientist has to say, we do not yet know. There is a small but serious group of scientists and philosophers who take this further. They raise a possibility that sounds radical but is held by thoughtful people, that the brain may not generate consciousness at all, but rather receive and channel it, the way a radio does not create the music but tunes into a signal that exists independently. On this view, when the radio breaks, the broadcast does not end. It simply stops being received here. I want to be clear, this is a minority position, it is speculative, and there is no proof of it. But the fact that it cannot be ruled out tells you how little we truly understand. Depending on who you ask, it is either a profound insight or wishful thinking dressed as science. What we can say with confidence is more modest and still extraordinary. Death is a process, not an instant. The dying brain produces a surge of organized, consciousness-associated activity rather than a simple fade. People who reach the edge return with experiences that are vivid, consistent across cultures, and described as more real than life. And the core question, what consciousness is and whether it can outlast the brain, remains genuinely scientifically open. And there is a final layer that touches every single person alive. The study of death is, in the end, not really about dying. It is a mirror. Every honest look at the end forces the same question back onto you. If your time is finite, and the moment of its ending is more mysterious and perhaps more merciful than you feared, then what are you doing with the minutes you have right now? This should feel heavy. Instead, for most people who truly absorb it, it does the opposite. It lightens, because the fear of death, examined closely, loosens its grip, and what it leaves behind is something sharper and more alive. So the question becomes the only one that has ever mattered. If this is the one life you are certain of, how do you actually live it? Here is what actually works. Not to cheat death, but to let the truth about it change how you live. Each step is drawn from what the people who have come closest to death tell us they learned there. Step 1. Make peace with the fact of it, deliberately. The survivors of near-death experiences return, almost without exception, less afraid to die, and as a result, more willing to truly live. You can borrow that without nearly dying. Spend a few quiet minutes, occasionally and on purpose, acknowledging that your time is finite. Not morbidly, honestly. The avoidance of this thought does not protect you. It quietly runs your life from the shadows. Facing it, gently, takes its power away. Tell me in the comments, has a brush with mortality, yours or someone's, ever changed how you saw your own life? Those stories matter. Step 2. Repair what is broken between you and the people you love. Now, not later. The single most consistent theme in the life review that dying people describe is relationships. Not achievements, not possessions, but how they treated others, and whether love was given and received. Do not wait. Make the call. Say the thing. Forgive or ask to be forgiven. You are living, today, the moment you would otherwise replay at the end. Step 3. Say what matters out loud, before the corridor. Many people carry words they never spoke. And I love you, and I'm proud of you, an apology. The dying almost universally regret the words left unsaid, far more than anything they did. Choose one person and one unspoken thing this week. Speak it. Step 4. Spend your attention as if it were your life, because it is. Your life is not measured in years. It is measured in the moments you are actually present for. Most people sleepwalk through theirs, lost in screens and worries and the future. Practice, daily, returning your full attention to the person in front of you, the meal, the light in the room. This is not a small thing. Presence is the only place living actually happens. Step 5. Decide what you would not regret and steer toward it. People at the end rarely wish they had worked more or worried more. They wish they had been braver, more honest, kinder, more themselves. You already know, if you are honest, what your version of that is. Name it. Then make one real choice this month that moves you toward it. If even one of these struck something in you, hit the like button. It is a small thing, but it tells the algorithm to show this to more people who need permission to stop fearing the end and start living before it. Do these 5 things, and the study of death stops being morbid and becomes the most clarifying tool you own. You cannot avoid the corridor, but you can arrive at it with less left unsaid, less left undone, and less to fear. So look again at what death actually appears to be. Not a switch, not a void. A process, a corridor the brain walks down with what may be its brightest flare of all, releasing in its final moments something that the people who have touched it describe not as terror, but as peace, light, and remembered love. We do not have all the answers, we may never have them. The greatest question, what consciousness is and whether it ends, remains open, and any honest voice has to admit that. But here is what the uncertainty gives us, and it is a gift. If the end is more mysterious and perhaps more merciful than we feared, then the fear that has quietly shaped so much of human life rests on shakier ground than we thought. And when that fear loosens, something is handed back to you. This life, this day, these people, seen clearly, maybe for the first time. The study of death was never really about death. It was always about how to be alive. I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below. If you truly absorb that your time is finite, what is the one thing you would start doing differently tomorrow? I read these and they stay with me. Here is the line to carry out of this. Death is not the lights going out. It may be the brightest thing the mind ever does. If this gave you a different way to hold your own mortality, share it with someone who is afraid of dying or of someone they love dying. They may need to hear that the corridor is not what they feared. And if you haven't subscribed, you should. What I am working on next reaches even further into the edge of what science can see. The light at the end of the bulb burns brightest last. So does the mind. So, if you let it, can the life you are living right now. This is a sensitive subject. If you or someone you know is struggling with thoughts of death or with grief that feels too heavy to carry alone, please reach out to a trusted person or a mental health professional. And if you'd like, I can help you find the right support resources.